Whose fans are those?
Not mine.
Not mine.
It's the Note Runners.
Congrats, Tom, on your fan club. My name is Grant McCarty. I'm the co-executive director of the Bitcoin Policy Institute. I'm joined here by Jason Maier and Tom Van Lamoen. We're going to be having a debate today. I believe the title is somewhere up there, Libertarian versus Progressive Bitcoin Debate. Quick rundown of how this is going to work and some of the thought process behind structuring this debate. When we talked before this, I think I expected this to be very heated. I expected, in fact, I thought it was going to end in maybe like a fist fight on stage. And while that would probably be better content, more newsworthy, I think we've actually found there's quite a bit that these two panelists agree with. So my job here and the ideal world for this debate is I talk as little as possible, and my questions simply highlight where they disagree. So with that said, we're going to kick it off with a couple intros. So why don't you tell us who you are?
Sure. My name is Jason Maier. I am a high school math teacher in the United States, and I wrote a progressive's case for Bitcoin, and honored to be here.
Sure. My name is Tom Van Lamoen. I'm the party leader for the Dutch Libertarian Party. And, well, I'm the only Dutch party represented here. They couldn't find another Dutch one, so I'm debating Jason. It's a privilege.
Amazing. So with that said, before we kick off the official debate, why don't we set the foundation? Jason, could you tell us, high level, how you would characterize what does it mean to be a progressive? What is a progressive ideology?
Sure. So I can answer from my perspective as an American and sort of the target audience for the book that I wrote, which is simply to say that a progressive, left-leaning, left-of-center person is someone who thinks that government as a role in society can solve some of the problems that the market provides, not all. But definitely has a role in making markets run more efficiently and smoothly and fixing some of the problems that exist. Socially is completely different, just sort of don't mess with me, I won't mess with you, respect people for who they are and give them dignity. That seems to be tough sometimes, especially if you just look at Twitter, but that's more or less the stance. Gotcha.
And Tom, how would you characterize libertarianism? And I guess a slight follow-up to that, for the audience members who maybe aren't all Dutch or American, maybe what are some of the nuances of how Dutch libertarianism maybe is different or the same compared to some other places?
Well, the philosophy of libertarianism is that government should not have a role in your personal life, and actually not a role at all in like market workings and everything. So, and there's of course different areas of libertarianism. There's more the anarchists and more like classically liberals and the minarchists. But they all follow a same principle. It's the non-aggression principle, and that's like live and let live. And libertarians are seen as far right, or doesn't matter, but they always say as it's such a negative thing, and they are pushing back against government, pushing back against monopolies and banking industry. But I hope that we can show that libertarianism is more like a positive philosophy of people who want to take charge of their own life and want to take more responsibility.
Gotcha. And do you feel like that is echoed, right? Is libertarianism pretty similar across the world? Do you think, in the Netherlands, certain things are shifted because of maybe where the center in the Netherlands is different compared to the center in the United States?
Yeah, for sure. There's libertarian-minded parties all across the world, and it really depends on how their government is structured or what their opponents in the political spectrum are. And it ranges from like anarchism or like more classically liberal.
Sure. So, last real foundational question. Maybe there will be some clash here, but given your political ideologies, what would you say that you both are striving for? Would you characterize that as equality? Would you characterize it as equity? If you give different answers, maybe why are you giving different answers?
So I think that in the most fundamental sense, right, we're looking for fairness, and it's an aspiration to strive for. And when me and my friends get together, we talk about this kind of stuff. We use the word equity, which does not mean equality of outcomes and never has. It means equal access to opportunity. And I think that I hear a lot of Bitcoiners talk about that as if, okay, yeah, I agree with you, but fail to realize that we're so far away from equal access to opportunity. There needs to be more conversation. It's not just sort of like, all right, everybody hands off, now we have equal access to opportunity. So I think that in terms of an aspiration, that's what I go for. We call that equity, not equality, equity. So you have a fair access to success if you work hard and you take responsibility for yourself, and the societal structures that have been put in place aren't in your way for that.
Gotcha. Tom?
Sure, yeah, well, I agree with it. And what I'm striving for, of course, is like equal chance of opportunity. And the way some people see equity is like equal outcomes, and that's never possible, because then you have to get like communism in there or something to just get everybody across the same line. But even if government would take a role in facilitating more equal chances, equal opportunity, then even then you have to give different chances to different people. You have to get people, you treat them differently. As government, you have to treat people differently to get more the equality of chances. And this, for me, this is the same thing as like affirmative action, and it's unethical to start with. And if you give this power to a government, who are they? Are they like the god who can decide who gets some stimulation, some subsidies or not? It's really hard to give this power to a government. And if you centralize power in government, it always corrupts, and this is our stance.
So that seems to be a key difference, right? Jason, you would say that the government, there is a role or an obligation to correct certain imbalances of opportunity, and Tom, you would say that even if there are certain imbalances, those are inevitable, they're inherent in some ways, and the best thing we can do is just try to continue, keeping a level playing field as much as possible, and not try to, pick who gets maybe a little bit more access at certain points.
Sure.
So what I'm hearing actually is ultimately, though, the outcomes that you are looking for, equality of opportunity, that seems to be shared, right? So you ultimately want the same outcomes, but you want to get there a little differently. So, that leads to, I think, a fundamental, crux of this debate, which is, do you think true equality or equity, equality of opportunity, we'll call it, do you think true equality of opportunity can come from a world where money has not been separated from the state?
Sure. So happy to answer that question. I'll say that my vision for the future is that one day we've separated money from state. But I guess what the idea that I'm going to take on right now is that it's not necessary for Bitcoin to make the world a better place, for us to see more of a version of what we want to see in the world. Without that, I think that there's an opportunity for Bitcoin to act as a check on fiat money, to make governments more responsible and accountable towards their populace. And I think that that's definitely one of the options that can come from a Bitcoin as adoption grows, as governments continue to understand it in a better way. It can actually be an alternative that checks the power of the government. And so I think that the government can keep their money, and we can have a better money, and people can interact with it. But Bitcoin will make the world a better place without necessarily separating money from state. Although I'm not opposed to that happening eventually.
Sure, yeah, well, of course, I agree with everything he's saying. But the thing is that if you have to take a political stance on why it is needed to separate money from state. And if you don't, then the adoption will go slower. But even if that's not the problem, then people, they need to learn why it's needed. And the state has too much power, and money is probably the biggest power they have. If they have the money printer, they can take care of all their problems, right? That's how they feel. And if we don't separate money from state, then we get back to equality. Like the last 2 years are the biggest example. When we're getting COVID lockdown and the money printer went on from the United States and the Netherlands and everywhere in the world, the people on food stamps, they grew exponentially, and the billionaires grew exponentially, and all in between, they got nothing. So when we talk about equality, the government has the biggest power, and they just corrupt it. So the way I see it is, we can't just let them do this and then say, well, it doesn't matter, we've got Bitcoin and it's going to happen eventually. I agree with it, and of course I've got no illusions that we are going to change the political system from within, but we do have to educate people on why it's needed.
So Jason, I think a common critique of progressivism is that a lot of people would say in order to provide the governmental programs that maybe progressives might want to provide, in order to provide whatever services that certain people believe the government should provide, that is inherently tied to the money printer, right? That you can't do a lot of these things that maybe a progressive might want to do without having access to just continuing to print money. Would you agree with that? Would you say that's a mischaracterization? And if so, right, what does a progressive world look like where you maybe can't just print more money for the services that you want to provide?
Sure. So I think it's a mischaracterization when people say that, only slightly, because really what it is sort of this fiat system. It's not just progressive. It's not just progressives who want to spend money to make the world a better place and give it to the government, right? Like Republicans in the U.S. want to do this too. So it's like the government is sort of addicted to this cheap money, right? It's not just like, oh, Democrats want to tax and spend. That's not the reality. I do think that if you think about traditional liberal values like fairness and equity and peace and just opportunity, all of this can be established and happen on a much smaller budget than the government has now. You can do it by being more transparent, by taxing people and say, this is what we want to spend your money on. We are taxing you now, and if you don't like that, you can vote somebody else in, as opposed to this invisible money printer thing. So I don't think that like getting rid of the money printer automatically undercuts progressive ideals. It just puts the ball back into the court of the voters to say, well, what are the values that you do care about? Do you want to make sure that elderly people are above the poverty line, or do you want to give oil companies a subsidy, right? Do you want to make sure that kids have lunch when they go to school, or do you want to cut taxes for corporations? So it puts the ball back in their court, and I'm confident that maybe not in this dome, but like outside of the dome, that progressive ideals can fit into a smaller, more transparent and accountable government under a Bitcoin standard. So
to summarize, it sounds like you're saying if you get rid of essentially the money printer, the ability to have a fiat system, it creates a prioritization model where you have to pick this is a service or this is what I want the government to do, and we don't have enough money to do it all. So we have to pick these 3 or 5 things or whatever that number is, whereas now I think many people would argue if you want it, you can have it because you can just print more money to do it.
And just one step further, you have to talk to the people about what you're doing and why you're doing it, and I think that's what's missing right now.
Would you agree or disagree with anything that he said?
Well, I agree with that is the ideal place, but for me it's like it's the ideal thing of democracy, right? And then you can just vote somebody else in. But you can see, even if there's like a small government that's just facilitating and it's ethical, it always has corrupted over time, because people vote, but people vote because of what they want in their own life. And the politicians, they tell them what they need, and the politicians, they give free money and they say, well, you want this, you want school for your kids, you want a big pension. And the people, they don't have enough interest in politics to get why they should vote for values instead of they vote for free money. So that's why, in my belief, it's never going to work. It will always corrupt over time. And like, for me, there's this one baseline, like the people in this room, they understand, like, not your keys, not your coins. For me, it's like trusting government to represent your values is like keeping your life on FTX.
So this brings up an interesting question, Jason. Let's use any developed country as an example. You've got multi-billion-dollar or multi-trillion-dollar government balance sheets.
Sure.
And that's probably too much for, or I think many people would say that is probably too much for any single citizen to fully understand maybe how one priority impacts another, right? If we vote for this program, which program does that leave on the chopping block?
Right.
And so, given Tom's comments where he says it could inevitably corrupt or will inevitably corrupt in that type of system, how do you, essentially, how do you make that work with your worldview that citizens will be able to vote for what they want and what they don't want?
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's not going to be as simple as all of that, and you can see the conversation, play out among all of the Bitcoin community, right? It's individualism versus collectivism, as if the answer is on one extreme of that spectrum or the other, and not somewhere in the middle, right? And I think that what's true, like Bitcoiners like to point out the dystopian futures of one side of that extreme, but not forget about the other, right? So it's no fun like living the extreme individualist life where if you break your leg, you're dead. So ultimately, it's about finding a place in the middle and understanding that in different times and different places, we need to find our place as a society on that spectrum. And presumably, government is not perfect, and I would never say that it is, but it's certainly the best option for us to hold in check some of the problems that we see that the market has simply failed, right? The market fundamentalism to say that if you just sort of back off and promote individual responsibility, it's a magic bullet and all of the problems get solved. The world is more complex, and that's not a fairy tale. So I think that what we have is an opportunity to just engage in more robust conversations about it. It's not easy to say, okay, well, if you don't like what we're doing, just vote us out. But what we need to do is start having a more robust conversation and not think that, oh, well, if I figure out which end of the spectrum to live on, then we'll solve all of the problems. That's not where the solution is. It's somewhere in the middle, and we can have a debate about where we are.
I'd like to dig into that a little bit more. And Tom, I would like for you to respond here. You say the free market, you're saying it doesn't solve everything, right? So
No.
What are, in your view, some of the limitations of, let's say, a truly free market, and where do you believe the government has a role to step in and play a part there? And then, Tom, I'd like to know really your thoughts based on his answer.
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, go first.
So, I mean, first of all, there has never been and never is a free market, right? Like, markets are designed around rules that exist that we all agree upon, whether that's informed by society or government specifically. But, I think a lot about like a ramp outside of a public library. Like, there's no profit motive for there to be a ramp outside of the public library in my town. But I feel better about my world and my community because there is a public library and there's a ramp in front of it, and so somebody in a wheelchair can get access to it. It's a pretty extreme example, but if you walk outside at the crosswalk, which if you're not from here, you get run over by a bicycle immediately. Like, you have to be very careful. But they have crosswalks here that chirp because they want visually impaired people to be able to cross the street safely. There's no profit motive that answers that question, right? There's no profit motive that solves that problem. And you think about all sorts of different examples, right? Like, there are neighborhoods around the world where, they call it a food desert, where they're like, supermarkets are not incentivized by the market to go open up a supermarket in this place. And so you end up with all of these problems where the market is not solving problems, and not a lot of them. I'm not talking about the world is horrible and we need to get rid of free markets, but it solves a lot of problems. It does so efficiently, it does so well, but it leaves off all of the inefficient, non-profitable things, and I don't want to live in a world in which we don't have people able to cross the street because they're blind. So.
Well, of course, I disagree.
You want to live in a world where people can't cross the street when they're blind. Okay,
no,
great.
The thing is,
they should take responsibility for crossing the street themselves.
Well,
right? Yeah.
the thing is, you characterize free markets as for-profit margin, that everything should be for profit, but I see it as supply and demand. And there is a demand for a community or a town or a suburb where people want to live and where they don't get run over by a bicycle. So when you see, even if it's for profit, when there's no central planning from the government, then the contractors, they can build a suburb or a community of houses. And if it's well built and if it's great with like sidewalks and everything where it's safer, then those houses are going to be worth more. People will want to live there. So this is how it will It's like you were saying, like the free market is like an ideal, and on the left side of the spectrum, on the right side, there's just ideals. I believe that libertarianism is truly different, and where it's not an end goal, it's not an ideal, it's just the way towards the end goal. We are against forcing opinions, against forcing people to go there, and everything should be freely interaction, just like a free market is free exchange. We only interactions happen if we both agree that we get better from it, and that's universal. So through this supply and demand, we believe that the free market and something like wisdom of the crowd will have the best solutions to every problem. And of course, there's no guarantee that everything will get solved, but that's we can see now that the government can't solve anything as well. So the thing is, we believe in wisdom of the crowd, that you don't know what the best solution is, but if you leave it as free as possible, somebody somewhere in his attic will get a solution that the government would not have thought about.
So yeah, I mean, I'm sympathetic to the argument, and I'm absolutely want to believe it, right? It's like when you solve a math problem and you say, okay, well, let's just forget about air resistance because the numbers are going to work out, right? Like you'd be able to say, okay, well, the free market will take care of it. We don't know how. Fair enough, but we see examples all the time, right? Like there's no accounting for companies who are not incentivized to provide goods and services to people that want them. And there's certainly no mechanism to price in negative externalities completely. It's just not possible. So as much as we want to just sort of do the parabola equation because it's easier, it's just not going to work, right? Like you have examples of there were no electricity companies trying to provide electricity to rural America in the 1920s. They just weren't willing to do it. It was not profitable to go into Appalachia and do this, right? And we know that electricity is a fundamental thing to like thriving, and millions of people, if not billions of people around the world don't have electricity now. It took a public-private partnership of the government to say, all right, well, I know that you can't make money by putting electricity in these places, but we're going to partner with you and subsidize that because we think that people should have electricity. That's one example, right? But there are plenty of other examples of, you know, what do we do about pollution? What do we do about all of these other negative externalities that exist that cannot be priced into your bottle of Coke? The price mechanism works to a point, and I think that's, you know, Tom and I agree on, you know, like everything up to a point. I just think it's an extreme position to say, well, the market will cover everything when we have examples where it hasn't.
Do you have any more thoughts there, Tom?
Sure. Well, yeah. The way that I see it, like when you, of course, you said like with electricity. Well, in the US, I feel like the first people that got there, and they started building new towns without government, and they built infrastructure, and they built like waterways and everything. Maybe not electricity in that time, but they provided for themselves. And when they built the infrastructure there, then the people wanted to live there, and then they came there. So this is like a free market mechanism that provided it. And when you were saying, what was the last thing you said? Sorry.
I don't know what was the last thing.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, I really don't know anymore.
I think to summarize the point, the idea was free market is good, you know, pretty broadly most of the time, but there are you can't price in these negative externalities.
And with like pollution, you gave the example of pollution. Well, for me, it's the same thing. People on the left of the spectrum, they always say, what do we want? We want people to take better care of the world. We want people to take more responsible care of the world. But their solution is taking all the responsibility away from the people and forcing the people to go on autopilot just because the government says something is bad to do. And what we see with pollution now, that lobby is stronger in the government than what the people really want. And now in the Netherlands, we've got like, they've got a line. The companies can pollute this percentage, right? And people just say, "Oh, that's okay. The law says that it's okay to pollute this much," and people don't know anymore. They just buy their company stuff and they buy everything from the company. But when there's no government to say this is okay to pollute this much, then maybe they will just think better for themselves and take responsibility. Do I want to buy a product from this company that pollutes only this much, but still pollutes? And I believe that we need people to become more responsible, and the only way to do this is to trust in the people that they will take responsibility.
So I think that this is right in the ideal, but if you're talking about an individual who there's a tremendous asymmetry of information between an individual and a large company. It's practically impossible for us to know, like, well, how much are you really polluting, or like, how are you treating your workers, or any of that for real. And so ultimately what we need is to have a system where the market can act with informed, intelligent individuals who want to take responsibility, but without them, I mean, you know, if you think that companies are just going to disclose this how much I pollute on their own, you know, I just live in a different world. Like, companies aren't doing that. They're trying to take advantage of people. Almost everything that we've heard about, like, what are we afraid of for government, can also be attributed to large companies, right? Like, my face was scanned by the government in the Netherlands when I arrived here. It was also scanned by my airline, right? Like, my biometrics are taken. Companies have the power to exploit people. So I think that we've almost missed the thread where there's two major threats to, like, our happiness and our freedom, and Bitcoiners by and large have focused on one of them and not the other, and there's a more complicated conversation to be had.
So the crew back here, they're amazing. The one thing they were super clear on was do not go over time. You know, there was like a veiled threat there, so I won't do that. We've got about 2 minutes left here. Do you all have closing thoughts? Is there anything that you really want to leave the audience with, or leave each other with?
Well, yeah, just to iterate on the last thing, I think that it's not an option, because what you're saying, like something like journalism should be the thing that corrects companies, or makes things more transparent so that people can make better decisions. But like, journalism is also bought by the companies now, it's bought by the government now. So just the centralization, it's not a solution either way. But the thing that I want to end with is, like, the only thing that we can do to get people more responsible and have people more, like, get to an evolution of better humanity where people act more responsibly, is to give them the chance to act more responsibly, and not just being top-down saying what they can do and what they can't do, because then they go on autopilot and there's no responsibility anymore.
I'll end with this. I say the Overton window is shifting completely, and Bitcoin is sort of in the middle of a viable political debate in America and elsewhere. One of my fears is that Bitcoin is not ready for the Overton window to shift. I'm a little bit afraid of what people are going to see when they look through that window. And I think that I don't want to change anybody's mind who's already a Bitcoiner, but I think new people coming into the space should be able to see a difference of opinion and a different way of looking at the world, and hopefully they feel more welcome in the space.
Well, thank you both. I think this was pretty amazing to see two people with vastly different worldviews uniting over Bitcoin. So if you have one takeaway, it should be that. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great rest of your conference.
Thanks, Ben.
Welcome back to the Bitcoin Amsterdam Live Desk, brought to you by Bitcoin Magazine. I'm your host, Alan Helm, and directly to the right of me, I am joined by Craig Warmke, academic and author of the upcoming book, Resistance Money, a philosophical case for Bitcoin, and then my colleague, Chris Salemo. Gentlemen, we just listened to the panel, a progressive libertarian debate. Joined on that panel was Tom Van Lamoen of the Dutch Libertarian Party, and Jason Maier, author of The Progressive's Case for Bitcoin. Fantastic panel. We're really starting to see this year the debate around the political ideologies and how they tie into hyper-Bitcoinization. Craig, very curious to hear, as a philosopher, we have two competing philosophies here that both had the end goal. They both want Bitcoin to fix the money, but they have two ways of seeing that tie-in and approach. Do you think these two different positions can, find a middle ground and help us accelerate faster hyper-Bitcoinization?
I do think they can find a middle ground, Alan. So thanks for the question. So I want to start by saying that I thought the debate was very thoughtful and thought-provoking. But I also thought that Jason's characterization of progressivism was not quite true to how progressives in the United States actually think about progressivism. So Jason is saying that progressives have, two main claims. One is that it's built on mutual respect, and the other is that governments can provide solutions to social issues. And I think contemporary progressives mostly have a default tendency to opt for government solutions to our social issues, and in some sense demand mutual respect, and rather than just have a value for it. And so I think that this characterization of progressivism is compatible, actually, with non-progressive political views like classical liberalism and even conservatism. But even so, even if we have this stronger progressive view that favors, government solutions for social change, we can ask about, non-effective governments in other countries, take a global perspective and say, even for progressives in the United States, might Bitcoin as a non-government solution work for those people in these non-ideal solutions?
Yeah.
Chris, anything to add to that?
No, I think Jason had a great point that you got to find somewhere in the middle of the Overton window. Definitely, we've seen a shift. We've seen RFK embrace Bitcoin. He was, traditionally with the Democratic Party, and then has now shifted to independent. We have Vivek, and we've kind of seeing it meet in the middle. So I do think there is a middle ground for Bitcoiners to coalesce around the idea of Bitcoin.
Yeah, there certainly needs to be a middle ground. I mean, it's truly interesting to see, at least especially on the U.S. side of the politics. Historically, things started out kind of, with a synergy. I'm getting the word that we need to cut it. Coming up next, the end of the International Monetary Order with Mark Moss.
Thank you, Miami, for the last 3 years in this amazing city. The whole world shut down, but Miami welcomed us with open arms. We want to show Bitcoin to the whole world. We are taking the conference on the road to set the stage for Bitcoin in a new city. Nashville. Bitcoin 2024 is coming to Nashville in Tennessee, a city that is known as a music and freedom city. Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville from July 25th to 27th.